What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 5 edition of Injury Report Live. I am Steve Buchanan alongside Megan Townsley. We're going to be getting into everything and anything to do with injuries ahead of the NFL Week 5 slate. Help you set some lineups, get some sportsbook questions, whatever you want to do. If you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment in the chat there. We will get to that. If you're on Twitter, you can add us on there at SBuchanan24, at Megan Townsley with an extra Y. How are you, my dear? How are you doing on this wonderful Friday?
I'm doing amazing. I feel like once we hit week 5, now we kind of get the separation between the pretenders and the contenders. So yes. I'm stoked to be here. I'm excited.
This is also the first week where we have some buys we have to deal with. Teams are on buys already. We have the Eagles, Lions, Chargers, and Titans are all on a buy this week, which is really early too. Do you think, would you rather prefer like the early buys, the mid-year buys, or like the end of year buys?
I mean, not that I am a football player, but in my opinion, I would take the middle. Honestly, get through half of the week or half of the season.
Yeah.
Take a week off, enjoy some time with the family. I think it's a little too early right now. Unless, some of these teams are dealing with injuries, so maybe it's better for them, but I'd take midweek.
I would actually say, too, that this week isn't too bad for injuries, at least from what we've seen from the first few weeks of the season. This week actually feels kind of tame, which I will certainly take any time of the year. But today's going to be a little bit more of a tamer show when it comes to magnitude of injuries. But let's get right into it. Let's start going off and rattling off some of these injuries that we are going to be dealing with this week. I want to get to one that we just got to probably about 10 minutes or so ago, but it looks like Jonathan Taylor is officially going to be out this week. And the way the Colts are going to be dealing with this is everybody's favorite, running back by committee, which is the worst news possible from a fantasy perspective. But if I'm being totally fair, I don't really think there's anybody who's overly appealing on the Colts side that I would want to roster to begin with anyways. Take into account, for as bad as the Jacksonville Jaguars have been, Megan, probably their run defense has been the only thing that they can hang their hat on so far this year. So early thoughts here on the Colts running back situation. I think I know what you're going to say. It's probably an easy stay away, but maybe you could surprise me. Maybe there's something that you like in this little group of misfits that we have for the Colts running backs.
I'm not going to surprise you yet. Not early in the show, but Trey Sermon is honestly the only probable answer here. If you want to pick a running back on this Colts team, he's 5,700 for daily fantasy on DraftKings, and he's the only other back through week 4 to even carry the ball. So when they say a committee of backfields, okay, you mean Trey Sermon, right? And people who went and picked him up on waiver wires are probably freaking out at that Steichen statement because that's the guy that I got to try to save me. But the thing about Sermon is he has not been the most efficient in his career. He's only averaging 3.7 yards per carry in his last 2 seasons, but Jacksonville did allow Cam Akers to average 4.1 yards per carry last week. And Akers is the third back in Houston who's been, getting first team snaps, obviously, because of the Mixon and Pierce injuries over there. So it's like, this Jacksonville defense is not amazing, but their rush D is kind of the only bright spot for them. They have, I will say, allowed the fourth most fantasy points to running back. So there is that to take into consideration. I don't know. I'm just not a fan of Trey Sermon. I think his inconsistency and lack of touches on the ball is enough to make me fade him in this situation.
And not only that, I think I would dare to say we don't even know how good or how bad this Jacksonville run defense has been yet. Because when you consider the opponents that they've had so far, they've really only faced one team that is heavy on the run, and that's been Buffalo, who's doing that, 51% of the time. Then you take into account the other teams that they've faced. Houston, which is one of the, teams that run the ball the least in the league. Cleveland, only at 34%. They've kind of gotten away from their run-heavy approach, at least with Deshaun Watson under center so far this year. Miami, about 43%, not a ton, obviously less than half. So maybe it's even just the quality of opponent that we've seen so far that has allowed Jacksonville to be a somewhat decent run defense at this point. The thing with Sermon for me is that he's too expensive. 5,700 isn't like a break the bank type salary, but for somebody that's carried the ball only 9 times, is averaging less than 3 yards per carry on those attempts. Yeah, he has a touchdown so far, but take away that touchdown and he's done next to nothing. And then you consider some of the guys that are around him in salary wise, like Jerome Ford is right above him going against the Washington Commanders, better matchup. DeAndre Swift, finally came alive, finally put the haters to rest, that it wasn't just the Eagles offensive line that was carrying his career. He actually had a decent game behind this Chicago offensive line, but going up against a very poor run defense with the Carolina Panthers. So am I going to pay up for somebody like, and I say pay up, but am I going to pay for Sermon when I can pay Ford, Swift, maybe even Austin Eckler, who we'll talk about later in the show, who looks like he's going to be the RB1 in that offense this week? It makes no sense to me. So for me, I am steering mighty clear of the Indianapolis Colts running back crew. But I think there's another injury that's worth talking about too, and that's Anthony Richardson. We don't even know the status of him yet. Do I dare say I actually kind of sort of want him to sit in this game because Joe Flacco looked so good last week, and he has one of the best matchups on the slate if he were to play. And here's the thing. If you get Flacco this week, Flacco is so cheap. Michael Pittman Jr. is also quite cheap this week. If you pair those two together, that's going to cost you $15,500 in DraftKings salary, leaving you an average of about $5,500 for the rest of your lineup. And that's not even including getting your defense and probably cheap tight end there. I actually kind of sort of hope Flacco's playing this week, if I'm being totally honest, because I want to play him this week if he is.
And I mean, it's not even responsible or smart to play Richardson in this matchup because he just is so injury prone at this point. I mean, he was already ruled out last season through week 5 and was done for the season. So I mean, I think I also agree. I think they should bench him. It's so funny when we get these backups that have been around for a long time that, the backup resurgence is such a real thing. But kind of going into your point, I think that stack would be a great idea because diving into the Jags pass defense, it is just atrocious. I mean, this team is 0-4. I mean, they did put up a fight against the Texans last week, but still the matchup that I do like here is whoever's going to be on the outside, assuming it's Michael Pittman majority. Cornerback Ronald Darby, he gave up 123 yards and a touchdown to Nico Collins last week.
Yeah,
and it was about like 147 passer rating to CJ Stroud. So if you could just exploit that matchup, hey, I think that'd be a great stack, and it's not that expensive. So I think we're in agreement here where the Colts stay away from the backfield, but wide receivers are kind of looking nice this week.
So is it safe to say that if Richardson is active, you're not going to be looking towards that way either?
No.
Yeah.
I would say if Richardson is active, I just don't even want to look at the Colts. Unfortunately, because I used to be a big Richardson fan, but his inconsistency it's too scary for me. Unless you want to throw, I don't even want to throw Pearson there because he gets maybe one 60-yard bomb for a touchdown. That's like occasionally. So I don't know, too inconsistent for me.
I will say though, and I'm actually glad you brought up Pierce, like definitely not someone I'm looking to get into my lineup, but his type of, repertoire of being that deep downfield guy does fit Flacco's profile more than Richardson per se. So at least something to consider there because, obviously you're looking at his stats here, very boomer bust, 10 catches on the year, but 234 yards on those catches, right? Like that tells you one thing. This is like Deshaun Jackson of this day and age. Like he's that guy that's going to go deep downfield and make those catches, but they're going to be vastly inconsistent in the meantime. Let's talk about another team that just had some injury news come up too as well. That is the Las Vegas Raiders. Boy, I don't even know where to start with this. You got Devontae Adams, who has a hamstring injury. That's kind of what you say when you don't want to play for that team anymore. Yeah. And then he posts this cryptic tweet on his Instagram. This is like very TMZ of me, but like I am intrigued a little bit here because I'm not the person. Here's one thing. I got to say this real quick. People who like realize these things so quickly, like someone gets followed or unfollowed, or like they're screenshotting people, athletes' stories and stuff. You guys are too into it. I will take the news later, but the people who discover these things, you discover it way too quick. But that tweet makes me feel like, because I'm sitting there for a second and I said, what would Edgar Allan Poe mean? He's a philosopher, he's a poet. But then I said, what is one of his most famous things? Quote, the Raven nevermore.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a trade to the Ravens is on the horizon. That's the only connection that I can make. I don't know if you're smarter than I am. Do you have another connection that you think that could mean?
I mean, the most obvious connection is the fact that the Ravens mascot is named Edgar Allan Poe. So that's what I thought when I saw that. But that's, I mean, Devontae Adams is in Taco Bell commercials. I don't know if he's trying to go that sneakily. I don't think that's kind of the direction he's going in. So, I mean, hey, we could go down a rabbit hole and talk about that forever. I mean, hoping he's going back to the Packers, which isn't going to happen. I'm just going to throw that out there into the universe.
I'm sorry. No.
Aw, let me just daydream for a second, please. No, but to his injury, sure. Okay, so Devontae Adams, he's sitting this week. We talked about this last week about the options behind him when he was out. Also, we have Jacoby Myers, who maybe has not shown that much production. We both agreed on Brock Bowers, who did not have that many targets. Last week, he had 3 targets, 2 receptions for just 19 yards. Now we're going in against a Denver defense that has not gotten the hype that I think it deserves. This Denver defense has done so well. Talk about a corner that's been locked down, I mean, almost his entire career, in Pat Surtain. So I honestly am not liking any of the wide receivers in Las Vegas going up against this matchup. Maybe Bowers, but I don't know. What are you feeling for this week?
Yeah, this is such a stay away for me because especially when you look at, how poor Gardner Minshew has been too as well. Like that's really where it gets, really bad for me. Like if you look at where he's landed as the quarterback for the week, he's been, and this is weeks 1 through 4, quarterback 16, 19, 22, 32. Math isn't my strongest subject, but I know that number keeps going down every single week. He was one of the worst ranked quarterbacks of the week last week. What is there to like in this offense right now? So we have no Devontae Adams. We have looks like no Zamir White either, which I wasn't really crazy about anyways to begin with, but just take another starter out of the mix. You mentioned how good the Denver defense has been all around. It feels like that's a defense that has really not been talked about enough. And then just the piss poor play by Gardner Minshew week in and week out. What is there to like about this offense? Because quite frankly, on a normal team, on a team that it can at least start moving the ball at least somewhat efficiently, you look at someone like Jacoby Myers at 5,500, who is by far going to be the wide receiver 1 on this team for this week. That should be an easy play at 5,500. I want nothing to do with Myers this week. I want nothing to do with Trey Tucker this week. I think it's so easy to just, when you're building your lineups, you have all the players there, you just eliminate everybody from Las Vegas this week. I have no interest in anything to do with this team right now. They're imploding, and we're about a month into the season at this point. That beautiful stadium that they built is going to be empty in about 3 months.
Oh man, that's depressing to say, but you're right. Like you're right. And kind of like tagging on, just in case you guys were considering playing any of the wideouts, let me throw this stat at you. Garrett Wilson lined up against Pat Surtain last week on 28 out of 46 routes. It's about 60%, and he only hauled in 2 out of 3 targets. So that, I mean, they're not even going to be throwing over there. So I agree. Fade the Raiders, but let's take it to, speaking of Devontae Adams and the Packers, let's switch it over to what's going on in Green Bay.
Okay.
Because we've talked about Green Bay every single week. They've been dealing with injuries, Jordan Love finally coming back, but a guy who's consistently on the injury report, Christian Watson, went down with a looks like a very serious ankle injury. They're calling it a tentative high ankle sprain, but that's just the media words. I'm pretty sure it's a high ankle sprain.
Right.
So he'll be sidelined for a couple weeks because that one takes a little bit longer to deal with. Now, the Packers wide receiver room is the most interesting because we have 4 wideouts that could all take the wide receiver 1 any other day. You got Watson, Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs. Romeo Doubs also popped up in the injury report as being questionable for personal reasons. So that's something we want to pay attention to. So that leads 2 other guys, Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed. You got to start Wicks this week. You got to. This is probably my favorite start of the week. Yes, because the Rams secondary is just as abysmal as the Jacksonville Jaguars secondary. And when you're talking about wideout targets last week, Jordan Love threw 44% of his targets were out wide. I mean, Jaden Reed is a slot guy. Like he loves throwing to that too. But I'm really liking the matchup out wide. And if you can exploit that with Dontavian Wicks, who had 2 touchdowns last week. Yes, because of that crazy resurgence coming back against the Vikings. I really like him this week. He's cheaper than Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed is going to be 6,500. That's the same price as Jordan Love. He's also 6,500. So if you want to go for a cheaper stack, take Dontavian Wicks at 5,000, and also you can match him with Jordan Love. That's my favorite pick of the week. Do you disagree? Do you agree? Let me know.
So I will say that Reed has been the more consistent receiver, at least when Jordan Love has been under center, because those 2 weeks where we had Malik Willis, that was just abysmal for Reed, really for the whole offense at this point, but Reed specifically, because the 2 games, because we have 4 games now, 2 with Willis, 2 with Love. You can tell who's under center on both those games just by looking at the game log for both of those guys. I will say though, would you be surprised if I told you that at least projection wise, Wicks is actually looking to be more popular than Jaden Reed this week? Would you be surprised by that? Because
I
I
would,
was.
I would definitely, yeah.
Because that took me by surprise, because I honestly thought it was going to
Mhm,
be reversed here. But like you mentioned,
mhm.
Wicks is the cheaper option here. He's only 5K compared to the 6,500 for Jaden Reed. And the thing with Wicks too is that he's going to get some of those deeper shots, whereas Jaden Reed really has been doing a lot more damage after the catch, not necessarily on the initial catch there. If you look at Wicks, his average distance of target sits at 14.8 on the year, where Jaden Reed is almost cut in half at 8.2. So Wicks is definitely getting some of those more deeper shots, and obviously he's been doing big damage with that too as well. But Reed has been like that yard after the catch monster so far this year. Regardless who you take, they are just both primed to be in a great spot here too. As you see the receiving yards over under here, pretty similar for both, 51.5 there for Wicks, 67.5 for Reed. But again, whoever you take, there isn't a bad matchup this week against that Rams secondary that has been so poor, whether it's their slot coverage, out wide coverage. They're just getting burned on all aspects of the field here. So I have no problem taking one. I actually don't even hate taking two, because if you take both Wicks and Reed, you are definitely getting a unique lineup there, because there really isn't like a great bring back for the Rams. The only bring back you could think is Kyron Williams. But if this game gets a little bit out of hand, like it could, you know, you're really hoping that Kyron Williams is going to get those targets out of the backfield. So I like the Wicks call. I think Reed is fine too as well. But regardless, those two should be into some really big targets for this upcoming week.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I just want to touch on for this, you did mention kind of Kyron Williams and what the Rams could do looking at the other side of the ball. The Packers pass rush is sneakily terrible. They are actually the
Sure.
31st worst in the league. They're only averaging about 23.7% or pass rush win rate. So, I mean, Kyron Williams could be a good option because Stafford doesn't have any weapons and he won't be pressured that much going against this Green Bay's defense. So, just kind of throwing that little nugget in there as well to touch on both teams.
I want to talk about the Bill situation, because I know you and I both have some thoughts on this one here, but Shakir is going to be officially out this week. And that's a big blow for this Buffalo Bills offense. I don't think people are giving enough respect to how good Shakir has been for them. He's been their main slot guy. He's been consistent week in and week out as a reliable target here for Josh Allen. But now it's like, who is going to step into that role? And you think it might be Dalton Kincaid. I think it might be Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel is someone that the Bills have even said themselves they want him to get more involved in this offense, because when that was made for Samuel to go to the Bills, I remember the initial reaction was like, "Oh, this is going to be great for Curtis Samuel. Like, he can get downfield. Like, this won't be a Diggs replacement by any means, but like it will be like that downfield guy that Diggs can be." It hasn't worked out that way at all. But when he has been on the field, he's been playing in the slot at the highest rate amongst all the Bills pass catchers, aside from Shakir. He's playing in the slot on 67% of his snaps. The guy below him is, I know who you're interested in, is Dalton Kincaid. So talk to me into Dalton Kincaid over Curtis Samuel here.
Yeah, definitely. The thing that I like about Kincaid, and this, I specifically was looking at the red zone. Kincaid has 3 red zone targets. Shakir has 3 red zone targets. Coleman has 2, and Samuel has 0. So when you're talking about targets in the red zone, Samuel has not gotten any of that so far. Again, we've only played 4 games. I do like Kincaid. He is a little pricier, and I know you don't like paying up for tight ends,
Sure.
but his volume has increased every single week. He's gone up in targets every single week. And this week could be the time where he breaks that 50-yard barrier because he hasn't hit that yet. Plus, he also lines up in the slot in the majority of his routes. I think that he would be a great target for Josh Allen. But that's also with an asterisk because this team, along with the Chiefs, who we'll talk about in a second, they love spreading the ball around and definitely will need to
Right.
now that both of their top receivers are out. So, I mean, I wasn't even thinking of Samuel until you brought that up. Now I'm kind of intrigued in that way just because he's only priced at 4,200 and that's very, very, it's a very cheap salary to get him at. But this is kind of a toss up because let me bring in Keon Coleman, who a
Sure.
lot of people have been putting on their radar because he's, wide receiver too. I honestly don't even like Keon Coleman that much. He hasn't been able to get separation off the ball. He actually was benched in the first quarter in week 3 due to some locker room troubles. I believe he skipped a meeting. So there's been some off the field behaviors as well that I just found out about. But that separation is really what gets me going against a Houston defense that's not that they don't have the best coverage defense, but they're still a good unit. So I'm a lot of people are kind of leaning towards Coleman. I would fade him on this way just because I feel like the ball is going to get spread around so much, the volume's not going to be there.
Yeah, I will say that Kincaid is definitely the safer option. Like there is no need to worry about his role in the offense, him getting on the field. That's going to happen. So if you're playing like a cash game, Kincaid is an easy click this week. Samuel is going to be your tournament play this week, and that's where I think it can get interesting. And I don't think the ownership has been updated as of yet because the news is still fairly recent. Because right now the projected ownership for Samuel is under 1%, as it would be. Because if Shakir was playing, there's no shot that Samuel's going to be anything fantasy relevant. So as the weekend goes on, I would implore people to kind of keep an eye on that ownership and where it projects. Because if he still stays in like that 2 to 5% range, at that salary, he doesn't have to do much to return value on that salary. Now it's gonna but that's gonna be an uneasy click because you're not gonna feel good about clicking him. But sometimes when you're building these tournament lineups and you need to be different, it's those uneasy clicks that you have to make and hopefully get return on value here, because that's where you can really stretch yourself from the rest of the field and move up those leaderboards and get those big cashes. So something to consider as the weekend goes on. But Shakir being out of the mix here is definitely noteworthy because, like we mentioned, he has been such a top target in that Buffalo offense that his loss is going to have a massive trickle down effect for the remaining players on that offense. Any quick thoughts there before we move on?
No, I mean, quick shout out to Shakir. I just looked up his receiving stats for the year. He literally has gone 3 for 3, 5 for 5, 6 for 6. Like that
Yeah.
is as consistent as you can get for a receiver. So they're going to be missing him this week. Okay, let's switch it to probably the biggest injury that we saw in week 4, Rashee Rice going down with an apparent torn ACL. We still don't know the official status of his injury, but he has
Yeah,
been
kind of
placed.
weird. Kind of weird.
Kind of weird, right? I'm like scrolling through Twitter. And I'm like, how many ways can you say that he has a torn ACL without saying? They're like, we're going to
Yeah.
wait for the swelling to go down. Okay, I understand. But we did get official status, as in he's on the IR for
Yeah.
sure, out for 4 weeks. For a Chiefs team that somehow wins every single week, even though their weapons keep depleting, what do they do now? Because now we've got Travis Kelce, who seems like he's on a snap count, kind of, not really getting that much volume.
Right.
And then Xavier Worthy is going to be the next big target guy. Can we trust Watson? What do we do in Kansas City this week?
Like it would make sense from what we've seen in the past that you automatically go to Kelce in this point, right? Like that's where I feel like it has to go at this point. Because Worthy is, he's more of that downfield threat. He's not going to be like that, under 10-yard targets that he's going to see, whatever. Like it feels like it should be Kelce over the middle. And I could be mistaken here, but I feel like this might be one of the higher yard totals for Kelce so far this year, except for week 1. I think this has been the highest that we've seen so far. But like, Worthy's at 42.5, Justin Watson at 24.5. Like there's too much uncertainty in this Chiefs offense right now. And if I'm being totally honest, this matchup sucks. Like, let's just call it what it is. This is not a good matchup against the Saints. The Saints have been great defensively for the most part, and Mahomes has been average at best. The days of must start Mahomes are gone, at least to this point. Like, would you feel confident in putting Patrick Mahomes into your lineup right now? No. And I just answered for you, but would you feel confident about that right now?
No, I'm putting
No.
Jordan Love in my lineups, honestly. Like that's direction I'm going in.
So I don't think I really, and again, this isn't on the main slate. This is the Monday game, I believe, but I would not feel confident about anybody in that offense right now except for Kelce. I think that's the only thing that I would feel good about at this point. Mahomes just doesn't look good. He's not throwing downfield. He's not throwing deep like he used to. He doesn't look comfortable in the pocket. It feels like something is off at this point. And maybe it's the lack of weapons finally catching up to him or something. But whatever it is, when you watch Mahomes, it just doesn't feel the same anymore. I don't know what it is. I can't quite put my finger on it. But even like when you're looking at his stats, like nothing even looks strong at this point. So without the deep downfield shots, guys that really can't do that except for Worthy, I don't know how I'd feel confident about Mahomes at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to fade Mahomes, which people will still probably play him because he's Patrick Mahomes. And I
Sure.
have him on my team. Like, let's throw him in my lineup. But Let's break down Worthy a little bit more because he is priced at 6,200. That is a pretty high price for someone who hasn't received that many targets. I mean, he only has 9 receptions, but he averages 17.1 yards per attempt, which is, pretty nuts there. He has 2 receiving touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown, but his inconsistency is kind of what gets me. That's like, oh, like I kind of want to play him, but I'm not sure. So I'm calling Worthy my boomer bust of the week. If you play him, there's a high chance that he gets 1, maybe 2 deep downfield touchdowns from Patrick Mahomes, because also the Saints defense has allowed the 3rd most yards after the catch over expected. Even though they are a good unit, Worthy broke the 48-yard dash record, right? So if you get him the ball, there's a chance he could collect a lot of yards after the catch. But here's where the bust part could come in is, like you said, Patrick Mahomes, he's only averaged 5.1 air yards per attempt. That's the lowest in his career. And also 71.1% of his passes thrown have been for less than 10 yards. So if Worthy is streaking downfield on a go route or a post route, Patrick Mahomes isn't making it there, Worthy's stock goes completely down. He's not going to collect any points. So risky play, yes. Kind of a toss-up if you want to throw him in there or not.
We got some questions in the YouTube chat I want to get to, so we'll just throw these out there and then we'll continue on with some of the other injuries that we have there. Matthew asks, is Flacco plays over Richardson? Is Josh Downs or Wicks a better play this week? Josh Downs got a lot of targets last week with Joe Flacco. I think off the top of my head, I think he had 9 last week. Against that really poor Jacksonville secondary, I think Downs is probably the answer for me. But I would say this is very, very close because I know you're very high on Wicks this week, so I'm assuming that you're going to go there. I like Jaden Reed slightly over Wicks, so that's kind of where my bias is at right now. But I would like Josh Downs a lot this week against that really bad Jacksonville secondary. Like, they're just they've been one of the worst in the league by far, and it's not even close. So Downs will be the answer for me. I'm assuming you're going to go with Wicks, but I'll let you answer yourself.
Yeah, interesting because Josh Downs is also one of my favorite kind of like newer up and coming guys in the league as well. Both these, Downs and Wicks are going against a terrible secondary, so kind of crazy decision right here. But I'm going to lean towards Wicks. You called it, because of the red zone target efficiency. He had 2 touchdowns last week, so if you want to pick up points in that way, I believe he'll get more chances to score in the end zone. So we just said we both like each of them, but
right. I mean, truly, and even though like that's probably not the answer they are looking for, I would say like it truly is a coin flip. Like I really don't think like one is necessarily overly stronger than the other. So that's not a bad problem to have. I would say this: if you can somehow play both, I would do that. Like if you can somehow play both, whether it's like in a flex spot or whatever, like I would actually rather play both. Someone else was also asking it. Someone in my league dropped Calvin Ridley and Javonte Williams. Should I pick up either? I don't think picking up Ridley would be a bad move. I know that the Titans offensively have been like one of the worst in the league at this point, and offensively they have been a mess. I do think that will rectify itself at some point during the season here. I think it's just been a really bad start between, Levis getting injured and whatnot. The offensive line has been really poor for the Titans so far. But at least the talent of Ridley, I think, can sometimes overcome some of these issues that they have. And I think they're going to make it a point of getting that ball to Ridley at some point. So I would say of the two, I would try to make a play to get Ridley because I don't think we're going to continue to see how things have played out so far.
Yeah, I totally agree on Ridley. I mean, there's a reason that the coaching staff in Tennessee are staying with Will Levis. They've made it very obvious that, that this is still our guy, even though he's struggled a ton. But there's something there that they're still liking. I believe, like you said, that they'll be able to work it out, at least collect a couple good games, hopefully moving forward. But I think Ridley's a good pickup.
All right, let's go back to some of the injuries that we have this week. One we haven't touched upon that will be out this week and is going to have a major kind of trickle-down effect as well. Malik Neighbors is out this week with that concussion. So that probably means good news for Wan'Dale Robinson. Did I hear correctly? You were kind of ragging on Wan'Dale Robinson last week. Did I hear that correctly on pregame power up, or is that a rumor, a nasty rumor that's out there?
There may or may not be video of me completely throwing shade at Wan'Dale Robinson on pregame power up. I knew when I saw Malik Neighbors out, I have to go back on my word and now defend Wan'Dale. Here's my public apology to him, because now I'm going to be out here saying put him in your lineups after saying that he couldn't even score a touchdown. But I mean, plain and simple, he proved me wrong, and he went out there and he got the targets. And Malik Neighbors has been an absolute stud, by the way. Some people are saying he's even better than Marvin Harrison Jr., but I just think the things that Neighbors is able to do is he's, making Daniel Jones look like a competent quarterback at sometimes. But Wan'Dale Robinson, just 5,600. He was earlier on the injury report with a heel injury. I believe he is good to go now. I don't see anything on this graphic right here. But last week, 11 for 14, 71 yards, 18.1 fantasy points with no touchdown. Honestly, going against a Seattle defense who is so injured right now. If they did not have five of their starters right now are questionable. Julian Love went down last game against the Lions. If this was a fully healthy Seattle defense, I would not play anyone from the Giants. But the Lions dropped 42 on them, and the Lions are a good unit, but they were getting like destroyed with deep explosive plays. It wasn't just a lot of easy stuff through the middle. So I think Wan'Dale Robinson would be a good play. Are you leaning in any direction or one or the other?
So I'm really on the fence because so last week against Dallas, he gets 14 targets last week with 11 catches. If I see that type of target share and all the catches, I'm like, oh, this had to have been over 100 yards for Robinson. He had 71 yards on those 11 catches. And it's been like a common theme all year. Like, I don't get it, because when you look at the average distance of target for the Giants receivers, Neighbors, 10.6, Slayton, 12.7, Hyatt, who's only had 3 targets, so, obviously take this with a grain of salt, 37, but, massive downfield shots. Wan'Dale Robinson's at 4.8. It's almost like he's being targeted as like a running back or something, or like a tight end over the middle, like these short throws to him every single time. So coming into this game, 81% of his targets have been 9 yards or less. So it's almost like for him to be productive, he's got to gain all these yards after the catch, and he really hasn't been either. Like, truly, he's like, his game, his offensive game right now is like a tight end. It's kind of what it feels like at this point. So luckily, DraftKings is a PPR site, so you'll get the points for the catches because he's making a boatload of them, but he's just not doing anything with them at the point. Like, that's my only concern. Like 48.5 yards is kind of crazy for his receiving yard line, when quite frankly he's made 18 catches over the past 2 weeks. Like that. So that's my only issue with Wan'Dale Robinson here, is that he's just not getting much after the catch. He's not being targeted deep downfield. But whatever, if he's gonna make 8-9 catches a game, then fine. Like, especially at his salary, then like you're gonna do okay at 5,600. But if he has another big game this week, he's easily going to be over 6K next week. And then it's like, okay, is it worth it anymore? Because if he's going to be 6K, 6,200, and he's making 8 catches for 70 yards and not scoring, is that worth it anymore? Now we're getting a little dicey. So at least from what we see this week, this might be the last logical time that you can play Wan'Dale Robinson, because as he gets more expensive, if this production kind of stays on that level, now it's not going to be worth it anymore. Like, now you're overpaying for a guy that's not going to do enough until he reaches the end zone. So that's kind of how I feel about Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm okay with using him this week because, just by, the law of averages alone, the ball's probably going to be going in his direction, but just be a little cautious here because the yards have not been following with the catches here.
Yeah, and I'm also very curious to see how, because recently he's been he's been lined up in the slot a lot, but Devin Witherspoon, man, he's a game wrecker at that slot position. He actually has lined up 43% of his snaps in the slot and 40% on the outside, which is one of the highest marks of being split 40-40 in defensive snaps. Last week, Amon-Ra ran 8 routes against Witherspoon and he only had 1 catch. So that matchup is a little scary for me. So that's why I'm not sure where Wan'Dale is going to line up the majority of this time with Neighbors out. I think all in all, I do still like Wan'Dale, but I agree that, 1, he's probably going to get more expensive next week, and 2, if Neighbors comes back, then his production is going to go down. So I say play him this week, at least as a flex position too, but would understand if you're trying to fade him as well.
Yeah, he's only been talking about Wan'Dale. He's only been out wide 20% of his snaps. He's 80% of his snaps in the slot is where he's going to be. But again, obviously with Neighbors out of the mix, that obviously is going to change a bit here. We only got a couple injury stuff that we need to talk about. Like this is great. I hope it's like this every week going forward.
Knock on wood. I don't want any breaking news injuries right now.
But it's been
healthy. Yeah.
It's been pretty relaxing this week. George Kittle did not practice yesterday. I don't think we got any word yet, obviously, going on the West Coast there. But, when he wasn't in that lineup, was it 2 weeks ago? It was kind of the Jawan Jennings show. So what do you kind of think about if Kittle ends up missing this week? I don't think they're overly concerned that he's going to miss. I feel like it might have been more maintenance related yesterday, but again, at least worth noting, being as one of the more expensive tight ends on this slate.
Yeah, this might be more just like a brief conversation about it because I did see a report on Twitter that his rib injury was more mild.
Yeah,
But okay, let's just in case he does sit, let's go through the scenarios. The Juwan Jennings conversation has been my favorite of the entire year, by the way, because I think it's hilarious that he goes out and drops 49 points on a lot of people's benches, and then they're like, "Do I play him next week?" And then doesn't hit that same production, obviously,
right,
because then your starters are back in. So I keep going back to that week 3 game where he had 3 touchdowns, 175 yards. But you got to remember in that game, Debo was also out. Debo
right.
and Kittle. And while I do think that Juwan picked up a lot of Kittle's more short field snap or short field balls that he would get, not having Debo in there gives Juwan Jennings so many of the targets. So I don't really love him going against Arizona. I mean, Arizona doesn't have the best secondary, but I just think you have Debo there. You'll have Ayuk, who hopefully is going to get something going. I mean,
Right.
obviously, it didn't practice for months in the offseason. It's kind of showing on the field. No shade there. But if we can finally get Ayuk to get something going, that just brings down Juwan's stock. The only thing I could say is that Jennings did line up in the slot 55% of his routes last week, Kittle on 63%, and Purdy did throw to the slot on 48% of his attempts. So if that trends towards this game in Arizona and he favors the slot, then the volume would be there for Jennings. But at that point, you're just rolling the dice, and I'm just throwing numbers at you saying that this happened last week. What if it happens this week? But it's a different ball game. And again, we have to see if Kittle sits or if Kittle is in, then all of this is out the window.
And while you laid that out so eloquently, I feel like it's going to be for nothing because I think Kittle's going to end up playing anyways. But break glass in case of emergency.
There
At
we
least
go.
you laid it out, and we know what to do. What
We
the
give you
contingency
solutions.
plan can be from there. One injury status that we will not know of, at least most likely until Sunday, is Brian Robinson Jr. going for the Commanders at their RB1 role. It's looking more like Austin Eckler is going to take the reins for this week and be the RB1 on the depth chart when they go up against the Cleveland Browns. I don't think I want to play Eckler this week. It's just I feel like it's been a couple years now where he has just been, I don't want to say fantasy irrelevant, but like the stock has dropped dramatically for Austin Eckler. I feel like the drop for Austin Eckler in a fantasy perspective needs to be documented and talked about at some point here. But if anything, like last week, I thought I really liked from what I saw from McNichols, if anything. Like I know Brian Robinson Jr. had a huge game last week, but McNichols coming in relief of Robinson looked really good last week. And I am curious if, Washington kind of made note of that because like while his touches were very limited, 8 carries for 68 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then another catch for 6 yards on top of that gave you 20.4 DraftKings fantasy points for probably next to nobody. I'm sure nobody played him last week, and I think he was at the bare minimum of 4K. So I almost wonder if you're just completely looking to go off the board, because if people are gravitating towards the Washington backfield, is obviously Eckler is going to be the answer, but like I kind of sort of want to play McNichols this week, like maybe in a handful of lineups here at almost the bare minimum in salary for running backs. But I just was really impressed from what I saw from McNichols last week.
And I mean, talk about low ownership. Because you're right,
Oh
like
yeah,
everyone will go towards Eckler. I'm not playing Eckler. I'm staying away from Eckler.
yeah,
There's something about a back that is now doing kick returns and punt returns where I'm just like, I don't need you in my lineups because he's being used in special teams for other reasonings, which you don't get points for.
yeah.
So let's stay away from Eckler. But honestly, Washington, they're going against Cleveland, who their defense has not been as up to the high caliber that we've seen in the past couple of years. I feel like this game might be a passer heavy script, obviously, because of how well Jaden Daniels has been playing in his insane accuracy as a rookie. He's been more mobile than we've seen him at LSU, as in being able to throw on the run instead of just taking the ball down to the ground. So I feel like the consistency they've had with being able to trust the pass game and trust Jaden Daniels, they'll probably stick with that more. And I don't think that the game is going to go very rush heavy.
And I want to make it perfectly clear. Like, I'm not saying put McNichols in your season long lineups. I'm not saying put him in your cash lineups, but I just honestly wonder if the team is ready to fully entrust Eckler in this role too, because last week was the first time this season, well, in his NFL career, that Jaden Daniels didn't rush at least 10 times. He was only 8 times last week. Could we see that uptick again this week because there's no Brian Robinson Jr. as well? So there is that concern too as well. I think this is just a long-winded way of me saying I'm staying away from Austin Eckler, even though he's going to be, he is going to be listed as the first running back on that depth chart should Brian Robinson not play, but I'm not convinced that's how it's going to play out on the field. Kind of like with Bijan and Algier that we've been seeing over the past couple of weeks. Like Bijan has been the RB1, but Algier has been kind of working his way back into, it was almost like Arthur Smith is back under the coaching again, and we're getting this BS again with the running back.
You stole my joke. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, truly. Honestly, though, like I'm at the point now where I'm like, Bijan's got to be hurt. And he's on some sort. That's kind of where I'm at right now because it doesn't make sense. And that's at least how I feel. He didn't look all that explosive except for that one run I think he had for like over 20, I think it was late, but like he just does not look right. So I am under the conspiracy theory that he's hurt or nursing an injury. We don't really know about it yet because I'm not convinced that but Algier's been probably the more efficient running back at this point, right? Like that's my only takeaway, but that's where I'm at right now. Conspiracy theory that Bijan's actually hurt. That's just my quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, we're going to put a pin in that. We're going to keep track of that for you guys. But it's funny because remember last year when Bijan had a last-minute migraine headache and wasn't on the injury report, they got fined for that. So if it comes out that he's injured right now, Falcons are looking at paying a pretty penny for that. Okay, do we have anyone else we need to touch on? It's a pretty light list today, I will say.
It was, but we still went the normal length. There was no sun that came in.
Today.
I bought a curtain for that window because I giving away too much information. I do this in my basement, right? I have a little setup here in my basement. That's what it is. But I just never had curtains on there. So now curtains are great. No sun came in because the sun's blazing. It's great. This worked out well. This was a solid week 5 injury report live, if I say so.
Sad
basement boy. Leave me alone. Okay. If you want to buy me a new mansion with a studio, then you do that. Okay. This is the house that I was given. It is what it is.
Yeah, and also you didn't have to let your anger out on Justin Herbert this week because he's on a bye week. So we'll save that for next week. Come back for week 6 to see Steve scream about Justin Herbert again. Don't put him in your lineups.
Yeah, absolutely. I may or may not be like a massive Justin Herbert like card collector, and I'm really regretting my my investment. So that I'm sure that has nothing to do with it at all. But folks, this has been week 5 injury report live. We are here every Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Make sure to tune in here once again next week. Of course, go on DraftKings Network website. We have a ton of football content that will be helpful to setting your lineups. For Megan Townsley, I am Steve Buchanan. We will catch you next week.